Yep, it is there now. So everybody, once again, welcome to the Fintech Design Summit. Thank you so much for Jon for being our opening talk. Please do drop a hello and a round of applause into the chat room. Jon, I will exit the stage now. Best of luck, and I will see you at the end of your talk for a quick Q&A. Good luck.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks as well to Isabel for the invitation to speak at such a great event. So the new title for my talk, in case you saw the one middle of the week, is now called Design for Growth, which is really about being able to design your way from 0 to 250 plus customers. Before starting, it's probably a good idea to state I'm only loosely going to touch on both fintech and design. However, don't let that put you off. As I promised, there'll be some useful takeaways for everyone, especially if you're a designer or a researcher or a product manager, and especially if you're already working within an early stage startup or perhaps an incubator where your access to good quant data can be a little bit patchy at times. So I thought I'd start by introducing Rebank. We're a B2B product. We've been working with kind of a secret group of fellow startups for just over 18 months. So we've been keeping a bit of a low profile. The founders of Rebank, Juan and Simon, took part in the Y Combinator program in North America at the beginning of 2019, or January 2019. After that rather intense experience, the core problem that kept coming up was that people, or especially founders, wanted to spend less time banking and more time focusing on making a success of their business, which is perhaps a bit of a no-brainer. So you need to travel back in time with me now to November last year, where I joined Rebank as their second hire. I'm the UXer at Rebank, and it's fairly unusual to hire a UXer so early on, but it does show you what importance that Rebank place on user experience. A little bit about me. So I've worked at several large agencies in the past, such as AKQA, where I was working for Volvo Cars on an industry-first car subscription product. Bio Agency, where I was working for British Airways, using digital to fix flight disruption or help fix flight disruptions. But also Digitas for the Digital Innovation Group, which was part owned by AstraZeneca. Also Pottermore. So Pottermore is the digital heart of the Harry Potter franchise. All the die-hard Harry Potter fans will have already heard of Pottermore, but I helped with the Sorting Hat and the Patronus Quiz, amongst other things. And I've also worked at Sofa Sounds, who pre-COVID were hosting awesome secret gigs in people's homes. But back to Rebank. This is what our product looked like in November 2019. I should say here, I'm not really doing the product justice, as there's only one of my bank accounts connected. But you could already securely connect multiple banks, which would appear along the bottom here. And you could already use the send funds button in the middle there to send international payments in 30 plus currencies, which is pretty neat. It was predominantly being used by other YC companies, as typically YC founders raise investment in USD, but then often operate in other markets. So the multi-currency, multi-account solution was a good fit. Rebank also allowed founders to avoid kind of multiple frustrating bank logins using those stupid little calculator authenticators that some banks love so much. We're really far ahead of the competition in delivering an aggregated business banking experience, as we were one of the first companies to get an open banking or a PSD2 license. The design wasn't terrible, it's quite clean, but after chatting with users, we realized we already had a growing list of things to improve. For example, here we've got payments in the main nav, and we've got transactions to the right of accounts. And it was very difficult for people to kind of describe what the difference between those two areas or two things were, despite the fact that most banks, sort of treat them in distinctly different ways within their product architecture. So as the amount of feedback grew, we realized we needed a way of prioritizing things or some sort of metric to work towards so that we could see and feel and crucially measure how our product was improving over time. So because we didn't have access to reliable quant data yet, we decided to use the qualitative research conversion as our metric, as we were already seeing some participants convert into actual customers of Rebank. However, we weren't converting very many people back then. It was 8%, or around one new customer every 2 weeks. So sort of slow and steady progress perhaps, but we needed to improve it. It can be difficult, when you're making design decisions to know how to empirically improve the product you're working on. That's especially amplified when you don't have quant data to help with your kind of successive product iterations. As designers, it feels like it is important to crave objectivity, which is why we decided to set this design challenge of converting 50% of research participants into actual customers. And we wanted to achieve that goal within 6 months. So I challenge everyone to set a similar target for yourselves. Your product managers will be thrilled. And some of you at this point might be thinking, it's a little bit odd to view research as an acquisition channel. However, I'm a huge fan of this approach, as there's really no better way of telling if you're talking to the right people or that you're making the right design decisions than if the people you're talking to want to part with their cash and become your actual customer. For those of you interested in reading a bit more of the subject, I'd recommend checking out The Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. Amongst other things, Rob talks about how crucial it is to understand how motivated your potential customers are and that essentially they're willing to pay you for your product. There are lots of other books on the same subject, but this is a nice light read. The title is perhaps a bit misleading here. The point is actually that mums will always lie to you and they'll tell you that everything you do is wonderful, which I'm sure isn't everyone's experience, myself included. So we realized the target we set was really all about optimizing towards product market fit. And if you do have access to lots of customer data already, then Superhuman have an excellent product market fit methodology, or engine, as they call it, that you could use instead of relying solely on qualitative methods. However, the Superhuman approach, it doesn't really work very well at early stage startups. At an earlier stage startup, a lot of people really aren't using your product yet, and actually often haven't even heard of you yet. So for those of you that don't know how Superhuman's product market fit engine works, you already need around 250 engaged customers or active users of your product, and then you optimize towards 40% of your audience responding very dissatisfied to the survey question, how would you feel if you could no longer use our product? So we need an alternative to this question, and we need to be able to use it before we got to the point of 250 engaged customers. So what we did was to take the same principles when designing for product market fit and then merge them with some Mum Test style thinking to come up with these 4 elements. So the first one is only talk to potential customers, which hopefully is fairly obvious. The second one is you talk to those customers about what they already love about your product. This third one is kind of their reservations, so what's holding them back from using your product. And the final one is to ask them, do they actually want to pay you for the real thing? So going through each of these in a bit more detail, this first one really is about segmenting research participants to see if dealing with a particular segment is going to result in more new customers. So for Rebank, this meant ignoring feedback from CFOs and finance leads to solely focus on founders who had less financial knowledge. This may seem a bit like turning away warm leads unnecessarily, but you can always come back to other segments later on, so it's not as bad as it might sound. We also decided to exclude pre-seed founders for now, as their banking needs were being met pretty well by other products or existing products. And finally, we introduced a 6-month cutoff to our findings, and that was to ensure that we weren't going to follow any kind of old leads or insights where the need might have expired or perhaps been met already by someone else. But you should segment as you see fit, follow your warmest leads. This next part, as I mentioned, is all about what people love about your product. And this is straight out of product market fit. This is about doubling down on what they love about your product. So this is really so you don't lose focus on your core value proposition, but it also helps you further differentiate yourself from competitors that might be trying to keep up with the incredible speed at which you're delivering customer value. So this next one, what's holding them back? This really is reservations. So this can surface things like price, it's too much money, or security, like they're not sure about it, perhaps the way you handle customer data. But more often than not, it actually involves discovering entirely new problems to solve, and those problems become the basis for your new features. It's pretty good practice at this point to pass those kind of potential new features through some sort of strategic lens, which will help you see what aligns with your future product vision, and also to see what's going to bring you, unique value, but it isn't going to give your dev team like a massive headache when you come to develop the solution. I can give you an actual example here. So at Rebank, we're not keen on doing payment cards, as our customers already use Pleo and Amex in the UK, or Brex and Ramp in North America. And it's much better for us to integrate with those products, and it's a better user experience. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel of payment cards or trying to compete with those companies on rewards, which isn't really our area of expertise, we can focus on something else instead. And so this final question, This is all about knowing if your research participant is willing to become an actual customer, as otherwise you can't track the metric or you can't optimize towards it. So this is really our alternative to that. How would you feel if you could no longer use our product question, which is straight out of product market fit. This can feel a little bit unexpected or a bit salesy if you're not careful when you phrase it, which we'll come to in a minute. So let's take a look at the structure of how we conduct research at Rebank. There's nothing too radical here, but our sessions are something of a hybrid between discovery interviews and user tests. So first, we use a simple screener survey when recruiting participants, as this just allows us to do some segmentation. And that means we can focus on conducting research with the right people, which is a pretty important step. The next sort of 15 minutes, which is roughly half a session, we talk to the participant about their experience of banking and running their business. We're really keen to understand, why their company exists and how Rebank might add value. Hopefully this isn't a new idea for anyone listening, as this is essentially a mini discovery call. But it's crucial that this part of the session is free from any anchoring or bias. Ideally, the participant hasn't even seen the Rebank website at this point. This next bit, we share a prototype for 15 minutes, and this is to validate a new feature for the next cycle, or not, if things don't go so well. At Rebank, we work in 3 to 4 week cycles using the shape-up methodology, which is working really well. And it's important at this point that the prototype you share is non-linear. And the reason I say that is so that the session can kind of evolve naturally into something of a product demo once the participant has finished interacting with the new feature flow. And then they can just explore the product as they see fit. And then finally, at the end, there's sort of 3 to 5 minutes left. And this is our non-salesy conclusion. The way we're handling this now is to ask 2 questions. The first one is, who do you think Rebank is for? Hopefully at this point they answer me, that's ideal. And then the second question is, what would be your reservations about using a product like Rebank? And here we're hoping they might jump into immediately saying, how much does it cost? Or perhaps, I've got no reservations at all, sign me up. That again is ideal. So it took a while to get this structure right, but we can now run these sessions every Friday with minimal effort. Another note here is that it's actually really exciting as a designer to see how many new customers your designs are converting each week, especially if you have a competitive nature. So that's quite a good hook to get into as well. Right, so it's just really getting into the detail now, but I thought it'd be useful to share how we convert those qualitative sessions into actionable data. There are over 1,000 rows of atomic research insights in this first column on the left here. And it can be quite time consuming to process them all. But my view with that is spending a lot of time processing research is the lesser of 2 evils, compared to simply not knowing what your customers are thinking. So yeah, the first column here is a verbatim quote or perhaps an observation during the session. It's important not to add any bias during this step, as we mentioned before. Then the second column is showing which existing features they loved within Rebank. So that's giving us what we should double down on. Then the third column here is showing any other banking pain that they might have, typically out of the discovery part of the session. And that gives us new problems to solve or the beginnings of new features. We keep a dynamic sum or tally of these second and third column. And that gives us some of the ideas or things we might work on for the next cycle. And we've also, because each of these insights is connected to a real person, and each real person is connected to a real company, which is actually our CRM. It means that we can further segment this data at any time. So for example, if we wanted to say how can Rebank attract accountants, it would be pretty straightforward and quick to do that. Another thing we've done that's quite neat with this atomic research table is to embed it into Notion. So any of the new problems to solve, which is the basis for a new feature, it actually gets surfaced to developers when we're discussing that work, when we're bringing it to the pitching table. And that means that everyone has access to the original context, which means we all stay a little bit more honest. And it means we discuss potential new features with less bias, which is great. So coming back to the present day now, you'll have to imagine that we've gone through this process. We've spoken to 200 or over 200 founders this year, which has been no small feat. And this is the latest version of Rebank. So some of the things we've doubled down on are payments. You can now pay people direct from any of your UK accounts. And you can also make batch payments, which is really good for payroll or for paying hundreds of suppliers at once. We've also doubled down on avoiding bank logins, or what we call avoiding bank logins, which is perhaps an oddity from a product manager's perspective, as we're enabling users to log into our product less through something we've named nudges. We've also doubled down on what we call collaborative banking, as we heard plenty of horror stories where people had to fly across the Atlantic just to add a co-signatory to their bank, and that now takes just a few clicks in Rebank. So there are plenty of other new features that we've added too. I'm not going to go into all of them, but we do allow customers to make sense of income and expenditure in a lot more detail. For example, we've enabled custom categories, which has been an interesting challenge for our machine learning expert, Samir. But we discovered that very few people like predefined categories. So despite predefined or default categories being much easier to automatically assign to transactions en masse, it's just not something that we would consider because it didn't have a lot of value. So yeah, those are just some of the improvements we've made, and there's always more to do, which is great because we like a challenge. So back to the target. We actually managed to exceed the target we set for ourselves. So research acquisition at the beginning of October was at 66%, and we're now well on our way to finding product market fit. It's worth mentioning here that the research channel conversion was in addition to the customers that we were acquiring through more traditional channels, so web, outbound, referrals and such like. So really, the main takeaway from this talk that I'd like you to have is that research, it's not just a basic usability check. It's not sort of something that doesn't give you more insight. In my opinion, if you're not converting new customers when conducting research, you're either not talking to the right people, or the design of your product still needs some work. So the method I've talked through today gives you a simple framework to make more objective design decisions as your company transitions from 0 to 250 or more customers. So hopefully it'll be of some use. That's it. If anyone has any questions, I imagined I kind of rattled through that. First talk of the day, sorry about that. Then we're going to have some questions in just a moment. It's also worth mentioning that we're hiring right now, so both for engineers and UXers. So if you're looking for a new challenge, or if you know of someone that might be a good fit, please email me. And thanks for your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your event. Does anyone have any questions at all?
Yeah, amazing, John. Thank you so much. And to echo that, everybody, we do have the Q&A tab. So if you do have any questions for John there, scaling, coming in at design early, please do drop it into the Q&A tab, and fingers crossed some will come through now. How did you find that, John? Was that your first remote conference appearance?
Yeah, it's all a little bit manual, isn't it, doing it from home? But yeah, it was good. I hope it wasn't too painful for you.
No, absolutely perfect. No pain whatsoever. We have a question here from Claire Brace. How have you balanced what people say versus what features that were or are being used? And she's put in here in brackets, told you what they wanted. So how do you balance what people say they want versus what features were or are being used?
So this is a classic research balancing act between attitudinal and behavioral findings. I guess the problem that we're starting with is we really don't have a choice here. When you're starting from scratch, or even creating a new product that you think is going to solve a new problem, you don't really have access to behavioral data. You cannot, for example, quickly look something up. So for us, it starts with attitudinal. It starts with working out what the problems are that we're trying to solve in more detail, and then the behavioral stuff is just what we see during those qualitative sessions. We now actually do have access to more quant data, which means that behavioral stuff is much better. And then you would want to be making sure that both are validating each other. So what we see in sessions is also kind of reflected. And also, obviously, the success of a new feature can be measured using behavioral findings.
Amazing. Thank you. So Claire, I hope that provided some further insight there. We have another question from Mike Gray, who started off by saying, great talk, John. So congratulations there from Mike. How did you acquire the research candidates? Were they potential customers to be initially? And then instead in business founders is a very specific profile. Not quite sure in what that part there is. Mike, if you'd like to drop another comment, we'll work it out. But the question is rather, how did you acquire the research candidates initially?
Yeah, so it is always a really big challenge. We got quite lucky in the very beginning because Y Combinator kind of has this network, which is very useful. And it just so happened that the pain that we were solving was felt by a lot of the people within that community. After that, though, pre-COVID, we were going to a lot of co-working spaces and just kind of introducing ourselves both to founders and to CFOs at the time, and saying like, can we buy you a coffee just to talk to us for 20 minutes to half an hour? And that was working pretty well. We've taken a lot of that obviously online now. So we either join communities or try and start communities. A lot of the communities we join tend to be within Slack. We have found as well, there's quite a lot of communities that are within, what they call dark social. So it's these sort of private WhatsApp groups and such like. But yeah, if you can piggyback existing communities, given that you can't necessarily go to lots of events, that's really good behavior to do. Certainly that's been what we've done most of.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, of course, companies out there that will recruit and run the testing of your users. User Zoom, user testing would be some examples there as well. Testing time would be a third. So thank you there for Mike. We have a question from Adriana. Did you create user personas or just use the analysis from the survey to create your product?
Yeah, so personas kind of splits the design community at the moment. For me, personas, if you're working within a really big team, it's a way that you can sort of share your understanding of your audience. So you might be able to reference a persona on a wall to be able to make decisions more quickly around what you're going to prioritize or not. When you're a small team and you do have access to the data, and the data is quite rich because you've gone through this kind of process, it is, in my opinion, much superior to actually just reference back to the data. So at any point we could segment accountants or finance leads or CFOs if we wanted to say like, okay, let's try and bring that audience in next. How might we do that? Like what else is missing from the product? That's a much quicker way, and it's a more objective way of getting there than starting kind of a workshop and saying like, okay, so we know this already about this persona, and then starting it but losing touch with that data straight away. So for me, if you can stay close to the data, do that. If you can't, personas are a really good way of having a more shared understanding of the problem you're solving.
Amazing, thank you. Another question here. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, I believe, so my apologies in advance. But Zueli, I hope I pronounced that correctly. What are the key design decisions which you believe have contributed to the success of raising the conversion rate? So I believe that is from a UX product and design perspective. What are your contributions from that angle that have resulted in a greater conversion rate, do you believe?
Yeah, I think, so obviously the framework here is like doubling down on what people love and then trying to tick off their reservations. We did discover that some of their reservations we actually had to deal with earlier. So our one page or our public website had to sort of start referencing things like how secure is the product, the fact that we're FCA approved, for example. But yeah, within the product itself, initially it was trying to hone the dashboard, or what we now call the dashboard, so that you had a better understanding of your accounts and some of the things that you could view there, and also your ability to kind of view your global balance in any currency and see the live rate right there, which brought a bit more value than how it was set up before. And we've also then brought in new features. So rather than just dealing with transactions, which can, I guess, always feel a bit foreign, especially if you're revisiting them when 7 days or more has passed, we sort of try and get into the behavior of processing those transactions and getting to the space where you understand what's going on, either with income or expenditure, without having to revisit transactions all over again. So yeah, we've optimized towards that a little bit. And again, like optimizing away from getting people to sign in when they don't necessarily want to be doing that behavior, so they can solve those problems within other platforms, for example. It's been really good. But yeah, it's the design decisions we've made have been numerous. Some of them are about just simple things like layout, how do people interpret your designs? Other ones are doubling down on some features and then also bringing some new features in.
absolutely. I mean, fingers crossed, every positive decision made should contribute to conversions and growth there. A follow-up question on this from Anya, and I believe this is talking about when you were looking to convert your user testers into users there. Were you able to follow up how many users you were able to retain of those that you onboarded through the testing? And from that, how many were just curious about a new product, or how many saw value in using it long term?
Yeah, so we do track retention, obviously, as every startup should. We also can just look at retention for the research acquisition channel. That's not difficult. Generally speaking, when people do want to commit and they do want to spend money, because there is a bit of a value, it's quite a logical decision with Rebank, because you can actually sort of send money and exchange money marginally cheaper than with some competitors. So for us, it becomes quite a sticky product as soon as they are using kind of payments or exchange, currency exchange. So yeah, with the YC founders as an example, if you are bringing down your monthly burn or your monthly expenditure, which can be 30 to 50K a month, but you are actually saving over £100 or over $150 on that, it's quite a magnetic product. But yeah, we don't necessarily track that in isolation, but we do look at churn more generally. We don't post sort of creating your account and starting to send payments. We don't really split it by acquisition channel at the moment.
Thank you. A question from Arun or Arun. Another great talk, or another attendee there saying, great talk, John. So thank you for speaking. How could you see this direct method of acquiring new customers through research work in established retail or high street banking? So I think we're comparing new fintech products compared to legacy banking, where the use space can be a lot broader. So yes, your method of acquiring new customers for research, can that be applied into other industries or more legacy areas of banking?
I think so. Yeah, for me, it really can. The thing that we sort of do as designers or as product managers or as stakeholders, in my opinion, is we sort of assume that we can always take customers, from one solution space and say like, oh, we're going to design this new thing for them, and they're immediately going to just transition into it, or they're going to find value in it. And I'm not really sure that that's always the case. I think quite often, which is possibly why you see lots of people creating incubators and trying to almost start from scratch, is that those assumptions aren't well proven or aren't well tested, and you see there's a great drop off. When you mentioned kind of retention earlier. So yeah, for me, if you're gonna start something from scratch because you aren't necessarily sure exactly what your existing customers want from this new product or what you're going to design, this kind of method is really useful, because you accept like, okay, what is it that we're going to build? All of our old data isn't really relevant anymore, because that is for a different product. So yeah, and then this is just trying to get you to the point where you do have more reliable data, which is the problem that we were really trying to solve.
And then the final question from Anya: do you only tag your insights table, segments, double downs, and new features, or do you tag it more granularly in other places? How do you manage large sets of insights with your tagging system, and do you find other teams easily?
Yeah, so this is something I'm trying to optimize at the moment. We have found it quite painful to go from transcript or video recording of a call into the atomic research table. I've been looking at all sorts of transcript software, trying to get to the point where I can sort of just add a tag in the middle of a session, and it will just appear in our atomic research table, in Airtable. That doesn't seem to exist yet, but there's a few companies that are getting close. In the meantime, it is a fairly manual process. We do tag other things. So for example, if a customer sends us an email and it's a very specific new problem or a very specific bit of a compliment on a new feature, we'll just add that as you would to kind of a CRM or something, I suppose. So the atomic research isn't just the research sessions, but most of it is coming from those calls in a fairly painful manual way at the moment.
Yeah, amazing, excellent. Well, John, that is all we have time for. So thank you once again from everybody at Fintech Circus. Thank you from all of the attendees.